Nicki and Mike FSC Cruises have been away since 2015, slowly cruising around the world. This is their 8th topic night. So, the next chapter. We've allowed for question time afterwards and how their experiences can help your plans. So please welcome Mike and Nicki.
Ari, is this on?
Thanks, Ariane, and hello, everyone. It's fantastic to be home in Fremantle again after 5 years away. Prior to that, we were away for 5 years as well. So we left Fremantle in 2015. So as we go, so I'm going to talk to some slides. Nick's going to talk to a little video. And then I'll do some more slides. But if you have any questions, just wave, jump up and down, ask all the way rather than leaving to the end. We have more questions at the end, but let's jump into them as soon as, if you've got questions, ask. So this picture here.
Could you be just a little closer to the microphone?
I'll try, how about I try this one?
Oh, that would...
Yeah, I know this one. 1, 2, 1, 2. Beautiful. All right, so the picture there is, guess where that might be? It's sunny, it's shallow, it's the Bahamas. And you get it, and there's about half a metre below the keel, and you just go for miles and miles and miles with that depth of water. But it's a lovely part of the world. So, as tradition dictates, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you. I'll tell you, and then I'll tell you what I told you. So this is the first bit. So we're going to talk about a bit of history, who we are, what about the boat and stuff, preparation we've done over time at various points, our cruising story from the last 5 years. If you want to see the previous 5 years, watch the video when we were here 5 years ago. Some new lessons, actually not very many, which maybe says we're getting better or we're getting luckier, I'm not sure. Or both. And a little bit about the future. And the picture here from OpenCPN shows our track. Couldn't fit it in the screenshot, but we started on the east coast of Australia because when we bought Zen Again, we were living in Canberra. We bought the boat in Brisbane, took it down to New South Wales, did a bunch of preparation work, and we took off. Ended up in Darwin, spent a cyclone season there, went up through Southeast Asia, did a big refit, really big refit in Thailand, came back down to WA, worked for a bit, and then up across the Southern Indian Ocean.
Whoa! That's quite good.
Right, probably take a few minutes for this to... Oh, I can keep talking. Yeah, so we left Australia in 2015. We sailed across via the islands in the Southern Indian Ocean to South Africa, and spent 3 months in South Africa and across the South Atlantic to the Caribbean. Our longest passage to date was from St. Helena to St. Lucia. I think, yeah, 40 days, 200 litres of water. And we did not limit how much water we were using, we just drank what we wanted, but we just used it for drinking, not for washing or just rinsing off after washing up dishes and whatnot. It is coming. From St. Lucia in the Caribbean, we island hopped up to the BVIs, from there to Bermuda, Azores, UK. And then we were in the UK for 5 years, basically working. Good, we're back. And And we did actually sail around the UK, which you might be able to just pick up. And then we ended up in London in St Catherine's Dock for about 18 months while we were working in London. It's about 100 metres from Tower Bridge. It's the most expensive marina in the UK, but cheaper to live on the boat in that marina than to rent a broom cupboard in London. So it's actually really great, but it was really cold in winter. So then COVID struck. We actually managed to escape St Catherine's, sailed around to the Solent, got into a marina there, got a variation to their standard contract so that we could live on board, and a week later the first lockdown occurred. And so we were living on board in a marina in Solent during all the lockdowns and all that stuff. Then as COVID happened, it started in the winter in the Northern Hemisphere, so when the summer came along, the lockdowns were ceased, and we were actually allowed to go cruising. So we cruised along the south coast of the UK. The south coast rivers are just lovely places to cruise. And then there were more lockdowns following winter. Following spring, we were allowed to escape. But we did not manage to get to so many of the places in Europe that we had hoped to. So we had hoped to get to Scandinavia and then cruise all the way down the northern European coast, France, the Low Countries, all of that. So sadly, our track doesn't go there. Where we were allowed to go though is Spain and Portugal. So we sailed down the coast of Portugal into the Mediterranean and ended up in Tunisia, where we met up with Revision 2, who had got to Tunisia by a very different route. Anyway, this is just the overview. I'll have to be moving on. So our history. So we've been Fremantle Sailing Club members 30 years. We started out together with a Viking 30. Then we had Degrees of Freedom, a Reynolds 38, which we cruised around Australia. We bought Zen Again in Brisbane, took it down to New South Wales, as you've seen, up into Southeast Asia, home of the Fremantle Sailing Club, and across the UK. That was the 2000s, we got the 90s, noughties, 2010s, and here we are in the 2020s. So that was good. Covered that. So the boat is a 1980s ILR 3/4 tonner, 10.4 metres long, beam of 3.5 metres, draft of 2 metres, so quite a deep draft, fin keel with a full-length skeg, etc., etc. It's sort of modest displacement, certainly not a modern light displacement thing, nor is it a older style heavy cruising type boat. It's quite good stability, masthead rig, and the previous owners did a lot of sailing. So the first owners were a couple, Japanese couple. They sailed it they circumnavigated South America from Japan. So that's quite a voyage. And the second owner was a single-hander who took it from Japan to Canada through South Pacific to Australia. Had a big accident on his way out of Australia, which is why the boat ended up staying in Australia. He nearly ripped the keel off. The boat was repaired. The next owners were drug smugglers. So the boat held the Australian record for a drug bust for about 10 years. $130 million. Didn't find any of it. And she was raced offshore in Queensland. So, preparation, I'm going to talk about various aspects, but the bottom line is we bought the boat over and over and over again, getting her into tip-top shape, which took the best part of, well, probably at least 5, almost 10 years, and since then just doing refreshes So I'm not going to go through all of these, but as you can see, it's a long list of stuff we've done over time. Instruments-wise, back in the 2010s, it was all about NMEA 183. We did have a laptop on board, but we had a marine chart plotter, so a separate box, tiny one. Then in 2016, around that time, networks changed to NMEA 2000, and we also added a thing called Signal K. I'm not going to do a technical talk tonight, but it's pretty cool, and you'll see some pictures of what that sort of stuff can do. And by then, the old chart plotter had gone, and we were chart plotting on our laptops, MacBooks, and on iPads. And we'd gone from a receive AIS to a transceive AIS, and we hadn't had any wind instruments, but we added a weather station, which gives us wind and a bunch of other stuff. We added a radar, and that's where we are right now. Actually, this is where we are right now. So we've replaced the boat laptop with a Mac Mini, which is a very low power computer. I absolutely love it. And what we're going to be adding, actually that's on board but not fully integrated. And when we get back to the States shortly, we'll be adding these two. So these older autopilots have been on board for nearly 10 years, and I reckon it's time to replace them, so we're going to do that. So on the right are some pictures of what we can do with our Signal K instrumentation. We can basically create our own display of all the various instrumentation data on the laptop, such as the top image there on the right. And on the bottom, because everything is being recorded, we can plot anything from the last 5 years. We can go back and say, what was the weather on that day? And it's all on disk, which is pretty nice, I think. Navigation-wise, we use OpenCPN. It's just the chart plotter that cruisers out there use on laptops. You can also do it on Android phones, but we don't have them. When we did have them, we didn't find OpenCPN worked really well. It's probably improved. You can buy charts for OpenCPN now. All the US and New Zealand, Brazil, Colombia, Panama charts are all free, so just download them. There's a cruiser's set of worldwide charts that everyone shares amongst each other. They're official charts. They're about 10 years old now, but if for nothing else, they're fantastic for planning, and we use them a lot. And we also use satellite images. On the tablets, we use Navionics Boating, which is a pretty average app, but the charts are pretty good. In the States, we also use these two other apps. Those are much better apps. And the Aquamap actually has the Army surveys of all of the inland waters. So on the east coast of the States, you often go through inland waters, the intracoastal waterway, and they regularly survey dodgy parts of the waterway and where they've done recent dredging and what have you. And that's all on Aquamap, and these are all really cheap apps. And I've sort of talked through that. It gives you this sort of information. What's changing right now is, of course, Starlink, which is totally revolutionary. And the big thing we found useful is weather radar, because in the States, the weather radar covers out to about 300 miles offshore. And you can just see that through Starlink, you can just look at the live weather pictures as if you're sitting at home with Windy. And it gives you a much more accurate local picture of weather, so you can see thunderstorms coming from 100 miles away. And that's a really big thing in my opinion. And of course you better do, pretty soon you better get live satellite imagery and all sorts of other things.
Mike?
Yes. Yes.
Mike, with Starlink, which practical contractor you guys on with that now? Have you gone with a full marine or?
I will answer that shortly on another slide. Yeah, thank you. Good. I was expecting the question, so I put it in the slide. I don't want to make this totally technical. I want it to be more about the cruising we've done. But so historically, when we started, we had a HF radio. We could use that HF radio to send short emails, and we could get small grid files, either through a Pactor modem, or if we were using WinLink, we didn't need the Pactor modem, but it was even slower. So, 3,200 a year, something like that. 2016, along comes Iridium Go. You can get bigger grid files, and it costs about $1,000, and it was about 200 a button to run. But it was only maybe 4 times faster. But it was much more convenient. And now with Starlink, virtually unlimited data. And I downloaded a package of satellite image files that were 30 gigabytes. It's just completely unimaginable with any previous technology. And in the middle of the ocean. That's before they started charging for it out in the middle of the ocean. So unlimited grids, full internet, so if it's on the internet, you can do it on your boat. And exactly the same price. I mean, these numbers vary depending on where you are in the world, what deals are on, all that sort of stuff. But it's 500,000 times faster. It's just ridiculous, right? So it's revolutionary. I reckon compass, sextant, accurate watch, GPS, AOS, Starlink. Those are all the revolutions. Love that picture. Got pretty ugly pretty soon after that. First time our anchors ever dragged. Don't want to talk about that. Right, so passive planning wise, these are the sort of things that we try to gather, and subject to the limitations of the technology we've got, what we try to keep getting, when we're at sea. So wind and wind gusts, so difference between the two tells you a bit about the stability of the atmosphere. The Cape, convective available potential energy, tells you about the likelihood of thunderstorms forming. But they are all on a maybe half a degree, maybe quarter of a degree, so maybe a 10-mile resolution, right? So there's no way you can learn anything very much about specific thunderstorms, just about how likely thunderstorms are. So it's all what I call low resolution weather. So that's the atmosphere. For the sea, we're interested in tidal currents and ocean currents. Now, everyone knows about tides, right? The water goes up and down, water moves around. But the exact same thing happens in the ocean. And you can go from here to 5 miles away and have a completely different sea state because the current is different. Same wind, different current, different sea state. So these are really important. Hazards we look for, obviously you look for the bricks. And as everyone knows now, zoom in to find them. Geography, as in acceleration zones. Big high islands with a gap between them, the wind will funnel between it, all that. Shipping lanes and fishing fleets. One area where Starlink could be a huge plus is, for example, with Starlink you can look at marine traffic, zoom right out across the whole ocean and clearly see all the shipping lanes. And where they're not in a line, they're probably fishing fleets.
If they've got their AIS on.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, so it can't solve all the problems, but it solves quite a few. Right. Okay, fast. Right. So that's the preparation stuff. So second verse, by that I mean, by second verse we mean what do we do after we left the UK. So we went to Spain, Portugal, Gibraltar. So over here, the first of the bullet points is way up there. So down from the UK, I need a pointer. Down from the UK to the Iberian Peninsula into the Mediterranean through Orca Alley. Everyone's heard about Orca Alley these days, right? Orcas that eat boats, specifically rudders. Yeah. There's a whole family of orcas that have taken to eating boats. And nobody's done anything about it, and they probably won't until somebody dies, which is a bit sad, because it won't end up well for the orcas. And the Mediterranean. We had never planned to go to the Mediterranean. I know lots of people love it, but I was never attracted to it. And I discovered that it really is motoring every day. Or motoring between storms. We love the places, we love the history, but for sailing it was not great. But the reason we went in there was that we were hoping to go to Malta, which is one place I'd always really wanted to go. But we couldn't get there because of COVID. Turned out we could have, but at the time all the indications were, no, don't come here. But also we'd been out of the UK for nearly 90 days, so we had to do the Schengen Shuffle. Anyone not know what the Schengen Shuffle is? Excellent, all well advised. So we went to Tunisia, where we met up with the Revision 2s, spent 90 days there. It was an amazing place to tour, but you can't cruise around in your boat. You go into one marina and you're locked down there, you're not allowed to move, but you can tour ashore freely. The reason it's so locked down is because they have a big problem with people leaving Tunisia, either locals or people from elsewhere in Africa, heading to Lampedusa, which you may have seen in the news. It's an Italian island not very far from Tunisia. So illegal immigration and all that stuff. Lots of people drowning in the Mediterranean, sadly. So we escaped from Tunisia, fairly quickly back to Gibraltar, and then out to the Madeiras, which is where there's that big handbrake turn in the first track. Madeira, and down to the Canaries, and then across to Antigua. And you can see we had to go quite a long way south. The winds were very light when we crossed. We had a good crossing, but it was quite slow. Quite nice sailing, no dramas. And then, so we arrived there in January, and our plan was to island hop up to the BVIs, and then onward to the Bahamas, and go to Nassau to get our US visas, because you must have a face-to-face interview to get your visa to arrive in the States on a private boat. You can't go online and get an ESTA. We got to the BVIs, looked at the website, booking time to first available booking went from 40 days to 100 plus days and didn't move, so we ended up saying this isn't going to happen. So we turned back around and cruised back down the saw even more islands in the Eastern Caribbean, and ended up, so we are going up. And here we are coming back, and we stopped in Grenada and had several months there in a marina working remotely and adding Starlink and some more batteries, because one of the things about Starlink is it's fairly power hungry. Not enormously so, but enough to make it difficult to run 24/7 on a small boat. So we spent a few months there, and then we basically had enough of sitting around the marina. It was halfway through hurricane season, but we decided we could see there was nothing coming, so we sailed west to Bonaire and then Curacao, and then spent a couple of weeks, 1 week in Bonaire, a couple of weeks in Curacao, and then sailed to Santa Marta in Colombia, where we're in a marina. It's another one of those countries where you can't really cruise locally. You just go in one place, and if you want to go to another place, you've got to essentially clear out and clear it again, pay fees, drama. So we just stayed in Santa Marta, which is what we're supposed to do. And then when we took a plane and went down to the Amazon, caught some piranhas, ate them. It was pretty good. And then we had a sail around here. So this is the Christmas storms. So this part of the world is quite notorious for accelerated trades, especially from Christmas to about March, where they can be like steady 40 knots, gusting 50. We only, like, they really can roar. We didn't have that, we had maybe up to 30, and it was a good passage. And that got us down to Panama, where we cruised through the San Blas, which was fantastic. Then we got stuck in Linton Bay? Yeah, Linton Bay Marina, because on the way through the San Blas, our engine mounts broke. So we had to deal with that in Linton Bay, which was quite an adventure. If you want more information, read the blog. But after we finally sorted that out, it was actually then a good time to get out of Panama, and we basically beat 600 miles to windward to Jamaica. Thankfully, the winds were only 15 to 20 by that time, and all the way up here, we're tracking north, but we're pointing northeast because there's a strong tide from the east that goes all the way through, wraps around the Gulf of Mexico, pops out here as the Gulf Stream. It's all driven by the southeast trades pushing water in here. So a couple of weeks in Jamaica, through to the Bahamas, stopped at various island groups. They're all quite different from each other. The further west you go, the more Americanized it is. And you'll see a couple of pictures in a moment. And then sailed from the Bahamas to Beaufort, North Carolina, and then into the intracoastal waterway that I mentioned, up to Annapolis, met some friends there, had a nice time at the Annapolis Yacht Club, great club. Should be twinned with us, neither of us are oil. And then back to a place called Deltaville, which is where the boat's on the hard, with snow on the ground. It's a bit scary, so we're going back in a month. So, very good. Time for a video. I get to shut up and Nick gets to commentate.
Well, good evening, everybody. Hope you're enjoying the presentation. So this is a very, very quick video of our travels. So from the UK, basically, to the US. Here we go. So this is 2020, when we managed to escape during a break in the lockdown, and we went along the south coast of Cornwall, exploring some of the rivers, and that's Old Harry Rocks in Stubborn Bay. 2021, as Mike said, we escaped from the UK, sailing down the Atlantic coast into the Med, to Tunisia. This is crossing Biscay. We were lucky enough to have fairly benign conditions before arriving in A Coruña in northwestern Spain, sailing through the Spanish Rias in Galicia, which were absolutely stunning. Then continuing down the Atlantic coast of Spain and Portugal, arriving in Porto in northern Portugal. Famous, of course, for its port, of which we joyously tried out many different products, before continuing down south to Cascais, which is the closest port to Lisbon. After Cascais, as Mike pointed out, we ran the gauntlet of Orca Alley, going around the corner into the Algarve in southern Portugal. So this is coming up the Portimão River. That's one of the villages just opposite Portimão. It's very pretty. So we stopped briefly in Gibraltar, and before carrying on into the Med, into Cartagena in southern Spain, which was our first experience of really ancient history, so ancient Roman, Phoenician, Byzantine history. Then we went through the Balearic Islands of Ibiza, Mallorca and Menorca. That's now in Menorca. A few days in Sardinia before our 90 days was almost up, and we were staying 3 months or 90 days in Tunisia, in Monastir. So that's us coming into the marina at Monastir. And you can see on the left there, that's Revision 2, and we're 3 boats along, so we're neighbours. Monastir was a really interesting old place, as is Tunisia. It's got the most incredible ancient Roman history. That's the Archaeological Museum in Sousse. That's a Byzantine-era baptismal font. We went to see the ruins in Carthage. We also went down to the Sahara for a few days, where we visited various oases and got down as far as the Algerian border, which is pretty specky. So it was a good 3 months. We're now heading out of the Mediterranean, so we departed Tunisia in October 2021. Actually managed to have a bit of breeze for a change of the Med. So we were heading about 1,000 miles west to Cartagena, which we did in one leg. So we're approaching the coast of Andalusia here. This is pretty typical what southern Spain looks like, which is really nice. So we had a few days in Cartagena before we pushed on to Gibraltar again. We're actually in La Linea, which is the Spanish side, but we walked across into Gibraltar with Division 2. It's an iconic view of the rock there, and the famous Barbary apes. Then it was time to leave the Med, managed to evade the orcas on the way out, and onto the Madeira Islands, including Porto Santo, which is the smaller of the island. Has some very interesting geological formations. So, and that's Quinta Diablo, which is in eastern Madeira, and we spent about a week or so just touring around. Pretty specky scenery. Then it was time to head south to the Canaries. That's Lanzarote, which is a real sort of volcanic moonscape. And our final destination was Gran Canaria. And it was time to leave Europe to head across the Atlantic. So this is us leaving Mogan in Gran Canaria. It was a little bit gusty on the first day because you get the acceleration. They're quite sort of steep islands. On Christmas Day we used the Iridium Go to call our family, which was kind of cool. But as Mike has pointed out, it was actually pretty light winds, so this was pretty typical of the conditions. A few squalls around, particularly as we got closer to Antigua. This is, I guess, it's boat camp. We will tour down below as we're heading into Antigua. So we arrived in Freeman's Bay in January. So that's just a quick rundown of our time in the Eastern Caribbean and then the Southern Caribbean. So yes, at the beginning of January we finally made it to English Harbour, and we'd arrived there in 2016, so it was about 5 years before, so it was like coming home. It was a good feeling. Then, as Mike pointed out, we headed north to Bermuda, the beautiful golden sands, before catching up with Division 2 in St Martin. And we were on the French side this time, and that's Grand Coast in the north of the island, which is, and they've got these incredible super yachts all over St Martin, so plenty of those. So that's Bubbly Pool in Jules Van Dyke Island in the British Virgin Islands. And then once we realised that we were not going to get our visas, it was time to head south. So this is us in Guadeloupe. Dayhay is where the Death in Paradise series, for those that watch it, is filmed, and it's a very pretty place. These are the traditional sailing craft. They're called Santois, named after the Ile de Saints at the bottom of Guadeloupe, and that's also a very pretty place, good hiking. Dominica was an absolutely amazing place, the next island south. It has the most wonderful hiking and beautiful waterfalls, so we spent a lot of time trudging around and swimming in some gorgeous waterfalls. Then it was on to, we've got a Ocean Cruising Club get-together, and then we were on to Martinique, staying at Fort de France, but we travelled up to Saint-Pierre, which was affected by an earthquake, a volcanic eruption about 100 years ago. That's the Dipaz rum distillery. and that's an old rum distillery sort of on the other side of Martinique. So we're rocketing past St. Lucia and the Pitons before we washed up in the St. Vincent and the Grenadines. This is Bequia, which has a really interesting history of boat building and whaling, although they told us they hadn't caught a whale there for a few years now. On to the Tobago Keys, which is famous for its snorkeling and diving, so yes, it's sort of quite popular with cruises. Cleared out of the Grenadines in Chatham Bay because it was time to spend hurricane season down in Grenada. And as Mike explained, we were there for about 3 or 4 months. Whilst we were there, we took part in Hash House Harrier events, and it was also the carnival season, so we got to see that too, which was nice. Following Grenada, we headed west to Bonaire, first of all, which is like a marine park, and very, very popular with divers. It's got loads and loads of snorkeling and diving sites, which have some really amazing wildlife. That's a queen angelfish. Then on to Curacao, which I also thought was pretty nice, and caught up with some Ocean Cruising Club people there. That's Spanish Town in Curacao. Now we're off to Colombia, which as you can see is a little bit more breezy and a bit more bouncy. The Christmas winds hadn't ramped up by that stage, but you know it gets pretty gnarly out there. Coming into Santa Marta, where we left the boat in the marina while we explored over land. So we went up to Minca, which is up in the Sierra Nevada, and we also spent a bit of time in Cartagena de Indias, which is the I suppose the Latin American version of Cartagena. Again, it's about 300 years old, and again, pretty popular with the tourists. That's Gethsemane, which is an old suburb of Cartagena, which has got this really bright street art. As Mike said, we flew down to the Amazon, where we were right on the border with Brazil and Peru, just across the river. And we did various night walks in the jungle, which was kind of fun. And that's in Peru. That's one of the Peruvian rainforests. Went fishing for piranha, and we caught enough for dinner. And they're pretty good eating, I have to say. So we're leaving Santa Marta now, heading for Panama. And we cleared in at Puerto Albalde, which is just over from the Colombian border, in the eastern San Blas, so that sort of gives you some idea of what the landscape looks like. Water was a bit mucky and full of trees, but as you get further west, it clears up. That's pretty typical for the eastern San Blas, and this is pretty typical for the western San Blas. It's the sandy beaches and palm trees and coral reefs. That's the hot tub, where we stayed for Christmas, and then we had another OCC get-together on Christmas Day. So after 3 months, it was time to leave Panama and head north, and required a great deal of bashing into wind and current almost as far as Cartagena before we could turn north. This was pretty typical of the sort of conditions that we were in. Until we got up to the northeast end of Jamaica, which is Port Antonio. And we were very gladly enjoying the red stripe beer. Spent a bit of time exploring the sugarcane fields and rum distilleries, as well as the coffee-growing Blue Mountains region of Jamaica. And it was time to head north again through the Windward Passage between Cuba and Hispaniola. Fortunately, there wasn't a great deal of wind. It can be pretty rough there, but we lucked out with the weather, before clearing into Great Enagua Island, which is the southernmost island in the Bahamas. Because we had our interview at the US Embassy in Nassau coming up, we had to zoom through the southern Bahamas pretty quickly, unfortunately, but we did manage to spend a few days in the Azores, which is a really pretty place and quite popular. This is Monument Beach, which is just near Georgetown, which is very, very busy in the high season. I'll never tire of the beautiful water, but you can see it's pretty darn shallow. That's the famous Pig Beach on the Azores. Made it to Nassau in time, so we had our interview, got our visas, and managed to do a bit of exploring of Nassau and the really vibrant culture, and staying at a few different anchorages before heading on to Eleuthera, which was one of my favourite places. It's very low-key, very beautiful nature, and we got to spend about a month exploring the island from north to south. So that's the south of the island, that's Governor's Harbour, and that's Royal Harbour in the north. So our final destination in the Bahamas was the Azores Islands. This is very, very different. This is much more developed. It's got quite an American feel to it. It's not that far away from Florida. So there are a lot of Americans around, and there's the Cheeseburgers in Paradise charity event that happens on the 4th of July that people just come over from Florida to take home. We're now heading for the USA. Again, the winds were pretty light. Had to watch out for thunderstorms, as Mike pointed out, but the Starlink and the radar apps did a fantastic job. Cleared into Morehead City in North Carolina. Spent a bit of time exploring Beaufort, which is a beautiful old town, before we headed up the Intracoastal Waterway, which sort of cut the corner to get into the Chesapeake. There's a really good craft brewing industry in that part of the US, so yes, we got to try a few beers. Went through a few bridges, went under a few bridges, before we exited the Intercoastal Waterway, going through the final lock and bridge to get to Norfolk in Virginia. So this is the sort of final part of the waterway, before we met an OCC port officer who very kindly let us stay on their dock in Norfolk. Norfolk's very strong naval heritage. It's a big naval town, so we got to see the USS Wisconsin while we were there. We're now leaving Norfolk, heading into the Chesapeake, where we stayed at another OCC port officer's dock. All up and down the East Coast, these port officers basically, help you out, give you accommodation, drive you around. They're really great hospitality. So we're now in Maryland. This is a pretty typical kind of scene that you see with the watermen and the oyster boats. We're now heading up the Chesapeake towards Annapolis, which was, I guess, on our bucket list. We really wanted to take a boat to Annapolis. It's got such great sailing heritage there. So we're waiting for the 6th Street Bridge to open so we can get underneath and get onto our mooring. We spent about a week in Annapolis, which is a very old historic town. That's Zen Again on her mooring in the river. Then it was time to head back to Deltaville to get lifted out for the winter. And there she goes out of the water. And we were all packed up ready to go to fly back to Europe and then to fly back here to tell you all about it. So I'm very mindful this has been a very, very quick rundown of where we've been. If there's any way you'd like to look at in more detail, we do have the blog and we do have the YouTube channel, so I definitely encourage you to go and take a look. Thank you.
That was awesome.
Absolutely.
Now, if my slides were timed, I'd have a similar challenge, and I would fail abysmally. Right. So amazingly, from the last 5 years, we've had various maintenance issues that we've had to deal with, but only one caused a significant delay. But generally, they were about new lessons, engine maintenance. I've got better at it because I kind of had to. I mean, all cruisers know how to change. Well, most cruisers, most sailors know how to change the oil, change the filters, do all that sort of stuff, right? Which is all good. We knew that our heat exchanger was probably getting a bit old and probably needed to be serviced. But on our particular engine, it's assembled in a really elegant way. The designer must have been really proud of himself because he saved a few cents. But it's really hard to, it's reasonably easy to get apart. It's quite difficult to get that together. And so that's what it looked like when we got the end off. And when we got it out, we realised there was a lot of pitting in the the casting around it, which we had to sort out. But that was all a good learning lesson. The second engine maintenance thing was the heat exchanger. The second one was the engine mounts. So we put in a new motor ourselves when the boat was in in Langkawi, in Malaysia, and to get it to line up with the boat has an interesting history, and the engine mounts were not the standard mounts on that Yanmar engine, and the beds were much wider apart than for a Yanmar. So it turned out we couldn't put a Yanmar in, we couldn't put various different makes in, and we ended up with the Craftsman, which has been a great engine, but it was right at the bottom of its, well, it wouldn't fit with its standard mounts, so we had to get low profile mounts from a company in Queensland, as it turned out. And unfortunately, after about 2,000 hours and about 7 years or so, I think, the engine mounts are these polymer inserts, the actual elastic bit, started breaking down, so they were just crumbling. These are the new ones. But when we put the engine back, so we had, because we put the engine in originally, we had lifting points that we could attach tackle to and whatnot, so we could get the engine out easily enough, just sat in the saloon. When we put it all back with the new mounts, it was too low. We could not get it low enough. And everyone was saying, get out a chainsaw and chop off the top of the blocks and just put your lids on and she'll be right, you know. And I'm thinking there must be a better way. And eventually we found an American mechanical engineer quite close to us. Just took us ages to find him. And he came on board. Within 5 minutes, he came up with a brilliant idea of having new mount bases made with the collar inside lowered by a centimetre. And Bob was our uncle. Once he made those, it took about a month for them to be made. So these are the new ones sitting there waiting for the engine to be put on. And everything seems to be sweet now. The central part and the polymer insert and all that sort of stuff the same. It's just the base allows the whole thing to sink far enough. But these are the sort of things you've got to deal with when you're in remote locations. And our main cell, as you may have seen from some of the videos, it's looking a bit ragged, so we've got a new one coming. And we replaced our 11-year-old AGM batteries. Really impressed they lasted that long. They're now being used by a emergency HF radio station in Grenada, so they're still in use. But we replaced with lithium. So that's the third picture.
Mike, with the lithium battery replacement, did you have to change the charging controller?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and yeah, that was the biggest part of the job. Well, the biggest part of the job was lifting the old ones out because they're heavy. Putting these ones in was too big a job, because the weight was so different. And we had 4 AGMs, which had a nominal capacity of a bit over 400 amp hours, but their actual usable capacity is half that, right? So we put in 200 amp hour batteries, lithium batteries, and we got the same. And we've got 2 empty slots that we're going to fill when we get back to the States. Yeah. Here we go. This is the one for you. So we put in Starlink in Grenada. It was fantastic. Take it out of the box. The box is so pretty. Take it out of the box, it just gets better. You know, you plug one in into the wall, plug from the router to the antenna, then stick it on deck, turn it on, and go, boom, internet. You know, in like 2 minutes, it's just insane. So we have what's now called Generation 2, which is the one that articulates. So it's got motors that pan and tilt. But there's a lot of misunderstanding about how often those are used, how much power they use, all that sort of stuff. So essentially, it only points when it powers up or reboots. And it will not do that if it's on a boat that is moving. If it finds itself on a platform that's moving, it says, oh, I'm not moving, they'll break the motors or something. But it will not, right? So if you turn it off at sea, change course radically, let's get to that. Sorry, so it only positions itself when you power up. If you then take, so we're in the anchorage in Grenada, facing into these lovely easterly breezes, turn on the Starlink, it goes, points north, sets the angle, everything's great. Sail away, do a 180, because nobody sails to windward, right? So you're going west, and it's pointing in entirely the wrong direction, and then the performance drops off, right? So that is why disabling the motors is a good idea, because it's just, you get it to be flat, and then you, which you can do by turning it upside down over like a plastic bucket, not a metal bucket. Turn it on, it'll go, oh, what on earth is happening? Why am I pointing south? And it'll put the arm upright and kill the power, cut a hole in the back, pull the jack to the motors, and you're set. You've got a nice flat Generation 3, because the Generation 3 ones don't do the pan and tilt or any of that anymore. So that's why disabling the motors is a good idea. It's because the system was designed to be put up on your roof at home. It would adjust itself once every time it booted up, and after that it would never move. But they were clever enough to put in an attitude sensor, and so if the unit finds itself moving around like on a boat, then it does not try to change. So that's the articulation thing. Power, it's a reasonable amount of power. It's about the same as a small fridge. We can run our small fridge 24/7. We can't run two 24/7. So we can't also run the Starlink. A lot of people do change it to running off DC, because it runs off AC out of the box. But it doesn't save an enormous, it depends on your inverter situation. We've got a small inverter, it's pretty efficient, hasn't been worth our while so far to change. A lot of people do, got no problem with that. Also, a question that also comes up is that the cable from the router to the antenna, to the dishy, has big ass connections on each end. And so everyone starts chopping big holes in their boat to feed the cable, the connector through. I said, no, it's just Ethernet. So it's actually not, they recommend against it, but anyone with a reasonable amount of care and knowledge how to use soldering iron can fix this up. So you can cut the cable, feed it through, reconnect it. Another question that comes up is to do with motion. Starlink defines in motion as being more than 10 knots. So long as you're under that, it keeps working. We've never had a problem. And if we ever get over 10 knots, it won't be a problem. Losing Starlink will be the least of our problems. And so plan-wise, your question, we're on the mobile plan normally, and when we're going offshore, we enable mobile priority. So it'll work outside, it'll work on the ocean. So if you go to the Starlink coverage map and zoom right in, you find yourself looking at hectagons, something like that. Hectagons, and it's either black or they're shaded. And the shaded ones is where you've got coverage. So it's not a strict 10 miles from the land or whatever. If you're in the box, you've got coverage. If you're out, you don't. At least formally.
Sorry, just a question. We just used Starlink in Kimberley. It's fantastic. We only use it in anchor. We're on a remote plan, which you use if you're offshore camping or something like that. So, and we only used it in anchor. roughly is the mobile priority or whatever offshore? Is it,
Right, so...
The true marine one is a quite expensive plan, isn't it?
Well, both. Okay, so the question is, can you, under what circumstances can you use it offshore? What are the differences between the standard and the marine kit and plans? Right, so the marine kit is at least 10 times more expensive, and the plan is equally more expensive. So it's more for commercial vessels and super yachts and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know of any cruising sailor as the high performance one. They'll probably come down in price, and they are better, but you know, who wants to pay that much, right? So this plan, it's a bit strange how this works, and it's a moving feast in that they're still figuring out how best to do this. For the first 6 to 8 months we had our equipment, we were operating in entirely black zones where they said, you know, you can't expect anything from us, because as soon as they say you're in a coverage area, there's a quality of service they've got to meet and all that sort of stuff. We were out in the middle of nowhere, and it worked everywhere, all the time. It was awesome, except when we broke the rules to do this, right? So this plan it's a per gigabyte charge, and it's fairly expensive. So it's a few dollars. I think it's per 2 gigabytes for some reason. But it added up. So when we were on that plan, instead of paying the flat $200 a month US dollars, because we bought ours in the US, it was about 500. But I was working remotely, so that was okay. But if I'm not working, then that wouldn't necessarily be a good idea. We're in the Bahamas, seeing all these lovely places, and having to pay quite a lot to pay for.
Okay.
So, okay. The future, third verse. So we've got what we call Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C. One's short, one's getting a bit long, one's pretty long. We call Plan A the average plan, Plan B the brave plan, and Plan C the crazy plan. So these are just, don't worry about exactly where they go, it's about where they start and where they finish. So Plan A is, all of them, regardless, unless something major breaks, we plan to go up the east coast of the States into Canada. And then we can either turn around and go back down the US coast, maybe a bit further south, all the way to Florida or something, because we missed a fair bit of the east coast by riding in North Carolina. And then from there we go across to the Bahamas, back down through the Bahamas, see a bit more of the Azores, which we saw only a little of, through the Windward Passage, probably back to Jamaica again, and then down to Panama, through Panama at in about a year from now. All of these end about a year from now. Brave plan, go up to Canada, and then go across to the Azores, Canaries, Cape Verde, which we hadn't seen at all, and then back across the Atlantic to go through Panama again this time next year. And the crazy plan is, having got all, what we realised is, after getting all the way across here, we've done all this easting, up in northern latitudes where the winds are westerly. We've got this easting, why not use it, and then we could come all the way down and see Patagonia, which our boat has seen before. So the first owners sailed from Japan to the west coast of the States, all the way down the west coast, through the Patagonian channels, and then up through Panama back to Japan. So that was in 1996. 1990, yeah. So that'd be amazing to do. Whether we will, I don't know. It's cruising plans, written in the sand. But you've got to have a dream, right? So that would be 45 north to 55 south, which sounds pretty crazy. So we're doing our research, we're getting charts, we've got the guide, this is the Bible. This is amazing, this book. It's the best cruising guide I've seen for a long, long time. It's so good we even bought a paper one, because we only had electronic stuff on board, but you can't get that one electronically. And happily, we do have a heater. But we're buying lots of warm clothing, new weather gear. We've already got dry suits, for bizarre reasons, but we've got dry suits. And on the boat, the things you need in places like that is longshore lines, which are also used in Canada, where you tie to the shore rather than anchor, or as well as anchor, because the anchorages are quite constrained. You're going to get a heavier anchor, go from 8 to 10 millimetre chain. We've never had trouble with, only had one occasion where we dragged and the boat literally dragged, it just jerked the anchor out of the ground. We've dragged in other places, but as far as we can tell, it was because the holding was poor. But on that occasion, when that big cloud you saw in the photo came over, we dragged there. And luckily the anchor, it dragged for about 50 metres and then it grabbed and stayed. And if it hadn't, we would have been on the beach, which is one of those risks you take as cruisers. It doesn't matter what gear you got, sometimes things can go wrong. Friends of ours were anchored very happily in Cuba, T-boned by a 60-foot French boat. What can you do? Fix it. Yeah. Getting more diesel ferries, partly because the old ones are 10, 11, 12 years old now, so I'm getting a bit worried about them getting brittle. But also we should have more diesel for going through the channels. Likewise, more propane tanks. The ones we've got now, we've got 2 steel Australian ones, then they're about 10 years old, so sooner or later people are going to start saying, can't refill that? So what I'm hoping is they'll keep refilling it for next year, and we'll buy some 2 new fiberglass ones and keep those after we're Patagonia. And spares. Communications-wise, what we're going to be doing is Starlink. So I talked about low-resolution weather, WX weather. What Starlink gives us is high-resolution stuff, local weather, thunderstorms, where they are right now, where they're going, to very high resolution. Traffic, global AIS stuff, social media, blah. Everyone talks about Starlink and Netflix. I mean, get a life. Really? But hey, whatever keeps the crew happy, right? And I'm not talking about Nick. Nick doesn't want Netflix. No, I don't think. Do you want Netflix? No. So what we realised is so we've got Starlink, we've got HF radio. I love HF radio, I mean amateur radio and all that stuff. So we still use that. We still send position reports over HF. We still run HF skeds with other boats we come across who've got HF radios. Most of them have never used them, but are keen to do so and really get into it, so that's quite fun. But we realised that having got rid of the Iridium Go, we want something where we can just push a button and other than an EPIRB, and say, you know, we're in trouble, and something that will allow us to automatically send position reports. So these are about $300, it's a picture of them. They're quite small. So that's what we decided to get, but there are Garmin, InReach, and all sorts of others. But we decided to get one of those. Of course, we have EPIRBs, mob AISs, and we have conventional flares because some countries insist on seeing them still. But the ones we probably use are the LED flares. And then beyond next year, so once we break through into the Pacific, if we do go to Patagonia, then it'll be northwards, northwest up to eastern Gambia Islands. There's a bunch of islands we can visit, having gone through Patagonia, that would actually be quite hard to get to if you went through Panama. And then we want to head to Hawaii, Canada, US, Mexico, and then across the South Pacific towards Australia. So I got a wish list what I wish this wonderful club would think about. And that is, well, there's been in there topics night, refreshing everyone's memory of going to Cocos, which was last done in the 80s, right? I think the club could get a lot of interest. I don't know how much from local boats, hopefully some boats would go, but if there was an organised like cruising company, no rules, no pack drill, just a bunch of boats getting together going across the Indian Ocean, there are a lot of boats that sail across Australia and go across the Indian Ocean. And for most boats from Europe and the east coast of the US, the Indian Ocean is the ocean they fear the most. And so I think it'd be awesome if Fremantle coordinated something that got some Fremantle boats like Cocos Keeling, rendezvous a whole bunch of other boats that are coming across from Northern Australia. Head to South Africa, it could be an Indian Ocean loop where the other guys would carry on and WA boats come back. Or we could head to the UK in the same way we did in 2015-16 and come back to WA as part of the bicentennial Parmelia event. Anyone remember the Parmelia race? Well, the bicentennial isn't that far away, guys. Time to get organised. Just a thought. Thank you. Any questions?
Mike?
Ma'am?
Sorry. When are we going to see your name on the circumnavigation board?
I have no idea. But I reckon we'll be back in Australia in 5 years.
No, but back in
Yeah.
Fremantle on
Well,
that
probably,
board.
well, it depends whether the Parmelia happens. I might have to keep going. But I'm thinking, well, WA, we're expecting 6-7 years. It depends how much fun we have on the East Coast. Well, but Perth is home. It's where the boat's going to come out.
Great. We'd love to see you on it.
Well, or in a box, yeah.
Definitely not in a board. On the board.
We've got to get home.
I think Ian's got a question.
Yeah, just a quick one. Caribbean, how do you find security there and elsewhere perhaps, but specifically
Yeah.
in the Caribbean? Is it a concern or you just have to be careful like anywhere?
Exactly. It's like anywhere in the world. You've got to be reasonably careful.
Yeah.
Some places more than others. And you have to go in the Caribbean, it's island by island, or rather nation by nation. And in fact, within some of the nations, like Tobago Keys is perfectly safe, right? But that's part of St. Vincent and Grenadines. And the main island had a big crime problem at that time.
Yeah.
The thing is that these things also wax and wane. But because there's so many cruises, especially where there's lots of American cruises, they want chapter and verse of what's happened where, when, and decide what size of gun to take with them. So there's a lot of information about where there have been incidents, and many of them are really minor. Some of them are very serious. But step out on a marine parade and get run down by a bus or something. Yeah.
Thanks.
Hey Mike, great talk to you both, absolutely excellent. I'm wondering whether in all your cruising so far you've discovered something remarkable about yourself or about the world that you might like to share?
Great question.
Have I discovered anything about me? No, I guess part
You're going to
of...
ask Nicki, right?
Yeah, well, indeed, I'll hand over the mic. As far as learning stuff about myself, I don't think so, partly because I did so much sailing as a kid and then working my way up to cruising on offshore races and longer offshore races and stuff, and that's how I got confident that I could do this. Right? I admire people who can just go out and buy a boat and next week sail off around the world, and believe me, many people do. I admire them. I think they're a bit foolish, but I admire them. but that's just my state of mind. In terms of learning about the world and stuff, I think I've learned that it's a really, really big place, because it takes a long while to get there in 6 months. But it's a really small world, and it's getting smaller through things like Starlink. But the nice thing about Starlink on a boat is that you can just turn it off, you know, and be alone for a month, and just drink 200 litres of water and 100 litres of fuel, and put a bit of wear on bits and pieces, and watch the world go by. And that is, we just love that, you know. So, Nick, do you want to add anything? Because Nick came from a very different starting place.
Yes, well, thank you for that question. Yes, I suppose it does sort of give you a pause to sort of reflect. And basically, before I met Mike, I'd never sort of sailed before, and the whole sort of idea of just taking off around the world would be, you know, equivalent of like going to the moon or something for me. But you know, the fact that I have been able to do it, you know, despite sort of overcoming the sort of doubts and any fears that you might have, you know, I suppose I sort of learned that about myself. And you know, people always possibly think the worst, you know, in terms of dangers, but there haven't actually been that many really, really scary situations, I don't think, sort of, I mean, particularly since in the last 5 years, we've actually sort of pretty much glided through everything, and I think you just take it in your stride, you know, and you discover that you can do a lot more than you think you could do. And I guess we've also sort of encouraged people, haven't we, people who are just starting off, who are also entertaining similar doubts that I might have had. And, you know, I sort of feel quite proud when I see some of these people, you know, sort of, who initially very hesitant to be developing into great sailors and taking all sorts of challenges in their stride. And, you know, I think that's what it's all about, is, you know, looking out for each other and supporting.
The thing the thing I'd say to last on that question is what we discovered about the world. I don't know. What we have discovered is that the community, the cruising community, blue water cruising community, is just amazing, just wonderful. We meet so many different people from all sorts of walks of life, but with whom you have something in common. And meeting locals all over the world is an amazing experience as well.
Can I just say something?
It's John Mike.
No. Just on Starlink, it has revolutionised the way we cruise, the way we communicate, and with what you're saying and what we experienced just 3 weeks ago, it changes overnight. And the things that you were saying that we experienced 3 weeks ago are different. So everything is fluid in Starlink.
Oh, absolutely.
And
yeah.
So just don't believe what it did yesterday, because what it'll do tomorrow is different.
Yeah, that's right. And just because you bought a Starlink this week or a few months ago doesn't mean that it stays the same.
No.
The software is updated continuously over the air. You have no control.
Nothing.
Right. So you can wake up one morning and it's got a whole great new feature, or it doesn't.
Yeah.
Right, on sort of logistical stuff, is this, you guys travel with Australian passport, British passport, interchange of two or and how much formalities or roadblocks have you found in terms of immigration processes?
Yeah, okay, it's a good question. It's a common question. We're lucky that we have both. Prior to Brexit, the British passport was quite useful in Europe. That all kind of went away. But having the British passport is the thing, because we were both born in the UK, we came to Australia as kids, so we still have both, and that's what allowed us to live and work in the UK. Right? So we could stay there as long as we wanted, pay tax, and we're just normal Brits with strange accent, I hope. But else, once we left Europe, we're definitely on our Australian passports everywhere. And clearing in and out processes vary from country to country. One of the lessons learned I was going to add to my reply to the gentleman in the front there was that one of the things you do learn as a cruiser is patience. And particularly so when you're dealing with officials. Because, you know, there's no point getting angry with people who can throw you out of the country or in jail, you know. So you just play nice, take it easy, chill. It takes all day to clear into country. So what, you know? Airports around the world are pretty much the same, right? You know, you come off the plane, you go through customs, you go through immigration, whichever order, and everything's sweet, and it's all totally automated because hundreds of people are doing it every day, probably thousands. But when it comes to boats, it's a handful. You are the 0.001% of people who are a real pain in the neck to them, right? So get over it, go through the process, and it's just part of cruising. But it's really hard. It's just tedious. Like you go to an airport and it's one desk to the next, right? Rock up at some countries, it's, you know, go to one office, go to the other side of the city to pay the fee, get a receipt, take it back to that office, and they send you off to another office, go to the bank, get a receipt, you know, whatever, you know, it's just the way it is. And at the end of the day, it's part of the fun. So, yeah. Any final questions? Oh, one at the back.
Do you have any difficulty with noise on HF radio from solar controllers or inverters?
We don't know. We don't know. But I've certainly heard of people who have, and it's generally due to poor installation on either the solar or the HF radio side. Yeah, but it can happen. But you know, I've been on boats where you push the transmit switch on the HF and the TV turns on. Actually, not very far from here. So yeah, there's all sorts of issues to conquer as part of the fun. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, everyone.
Mike and Nicki, thank you so much. That was really fantastic. Lots and lots of amazing. Now, if you don't attend Twilights, just some really quick notices from the cruising section. Please check the Facebook page regularly. We have our events upcoming there posted regularly. Twilights are every Wednesday, of course, with sausage sizzle and prizes. The jam is this Sunday, the next jam. Please see Ollie's emails and register for that as soon as you can.
Crew available.
Yes. Yes. Please, please. My messenger, yes? Messenger? Yep, contact. When are you leaving? When do you have to go back?
Leaving Fremantle,
8th of March. Madeira weekend, 9th and 10th of March. The cruises, races and power section also welcome. The next topic night will be Martin Chambers, and he will be talking about a Tasmanian event with wooden boats called the Raid, which should be really interesting. There might be a new wooden boat up here in the foyer downstairs, so keep an eye out for that. Progressive dinner is on the 23rd of March, Saturday night, which is always super popular. Matt Duff is doing the Cock of the Rock, 24th of March. And then after that, the Ross Islands Rally, Sandy, should be happening straight after Easter. Okay, so thank you so much, everybody. Have a great week.
Yay.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Just introduce yourself. My name's Ian.